The gunshot echoed through the dusty air of Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878. As Felicity Morgan darted between buildings, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. Blood trickled from a cut on her cheek where a stone had struck her, and her once fine blue dress was torn at the hem from her desperate flight. Behind her, the angry voices grew louder, the mob of townspeople gaining ground with each passing second. "There she is," someone shouted. "The thieving witch." Felicity had never stolen anything in her life. The pocket watch they accused her of taking had been a gift from Mr. Holloway before his untimely death, a payment for nursing him through his final days. But his greedy son couldn't accept that his father would give such a valuable heirloom to a mere nurse, a woman who had arrived in Silver Creek just 6 months ago with nothing but a carpetbag and mysterious past. She stumbled into an alley, her lungs burning for air. The back of the general store loomed ahead, offering momentary shelter. Felicity ducked behind a stack of empty crates, drawing her knees to her chest and making herself as small as possible. Tears threatened, but she fought them back. Crying wouldn't save her now. The mob's footsteps thundered closer. At least 15 men and women from town, led by Thomas Holloway, all convinced she was a thief, perhaps worse. In a frontier town like Silver Creek, accusations could turn deadly in an instant. She went this way. The voice was close now, too close. Felicity pressed herself harder against the wooden wall, praying for a miracle, for some escape from this nightmare. That's when she heard the steady clip-clop of a horse approaching from the opposite direction. Through a gap in the crates, she watched as a tall figure on horseback appeared at the alley's entrance. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion. Even in her terror, Felicity couldn't help but notice his imposing presence. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a weather-beaten duster that had seen many miles, and beneath his wide-brimmed hat, she caught the glint of eyes surveying the scene with calculating calm. The mob rounded the corner, coming face to face with the stranger who now stood blocking their path to Felicity. "Out of the way, mister," Thomas Holloway snarled, his face flushed with anger and exertion. "We're after a thief." The stranger didn't move. Instead, his hand drifted to the holster at his hip, and in one smooth motion, he drew his revolver. The mob faltered, several people taking a step back. 15 against one woman doesn't seem like fair odds to me, the stranger said, his voice deep and steady. "Why don't you all explain what's got you so riled up?" "This ain't your business, cowboy," Thomas spat. "I'm making it my business." The stranger's stance shifted slightly, and Felicity noticed the tin star pinned to his vest, partially hidden by his duster. "Name's Hunter Reid, U.S. Marshal. Now, let's all calm down and discuss this properly." Felicity's heart skipped a beat. A marshal. Perhaps there was hope after all. Thomas Holloway stepped forward, his finger pointing accusingly toward Felicity's hiding place. "That woman stole my father's gold pocket watch. Family heirloom worth more than she'd earn in 5 years. We caught her red-handed, trying to sell it to the jeweler." Marshal Reid's eyes flicked briefly to where Felicity was hidden, then back to Thomas. "And you thought chasing her through town with a mob was the appropriate response?" "Law moves too slow around here," a voice called from the crowd. "Well, it just got a whole lot faster," Reid replied, his gun unwavering. "Because I'm here now. So everyone take a step back, and let's handle this properly." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Felicity held her breath, watching through the slats of the crates as the marshal faced down the entire mob without so much as a twitch. Finally, Thomas Holloway's shoulders slumped slightly. "Fine. We'll do it your way, Marshal. But that watch belongs to my family." "We'll sort that out," Reid said. "Now, I want everyone to disperse. Go back to your homes or businesses. This isn't how justice works." Reluctantly, the crowd began to break up, though many shot venomous glares toward Felicity's hiding place. Thomas Holloway was the last to leave, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "This isn't over," he muttered as he turned away. When they had all gone, Marshal Reid holstered his weapon and approached the crates. Felicity pressed herself harder against the wall, unsure if she had merely traded one danger for another. "You can come out now, miss," he said, his voice gentler than before. "They're gone." Slowly, Felicity emerged from her hiding place, her legs trembling so badly she feared they might give way beneath her. Up close, She could see the marshal clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. His eyes were a clear, piercing blue that seemed to look right through her. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gaze taking in the cut on her cheek and her disheveled appearance. "No," Felicity said, then amended, "nothing serious." Marshal Reid nodded. "Good. Now, I think you'd better tell me about this pocket watch that's got half the town ready to string you up." Felicity's hand went instinctively to her pocket where the watch rested. "It was a gift. I didn't steal it." "I figured as much," Reid said. "Most thieves don't try to sell stolen goods in the same town they stole them from. Not the smart ones, anyway." He glanced around the alley. "But this isn't the place to talk. Come with me." He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Felicity took it. His palm was calloused but warm, and his grip steady as he helped her to her feet. "My horse is just around the corner," he said. "We'll head to the sheriff's office. You'll be safe there." As they walked, Felicity felt the stares of townsfolk following them. The marshal must have sensed her discomfort because he positioned himself between her and the street, his hand resting casually near his holster. His horse was a magnificent chestnut gelding, strong and well-groomed despite the dust of the trail. Reid helped Felicity mount, then swung up behind her. The closeness was improper by any standard, but given the circumstances, propriety seemed a distant concern. "Hold on," he murmured, and she gripped the saddle horn as he guided the horse toward the center of town. The sheriff's office was a small, sturdy building on the main street. As they approached, a man with a gray mustache stepped out onto the porch, his eyebrows rising at the sight of them. "Reid? Didn't expect to see you back so soon," he said, then his gaze fell on Felicity. "And with company, no less." "Sheriff Cooper," Reid acknowledged as he dismounted, then helped Felicity down. "Found this young lady being chased by a mob. Thought we might sort things out here." Sheriff Cooper sighed heavily. "Thomas Holloway's been stirring up trouble all morning. Come on in, both of you." Inside, the office was sparse but clean. A desk, a few chairs, and 3 cells at the back, all empty at present. Sheriff Cooper gestured for Felicity to take a seat, then settled behind his desk. "Now, miss, why don't you start at the beginning?" Felicity took a deep breath. "My name is Felicity Morgan. I came to Silver Creek 6 months ago to work as a nurse and companion to Mr. Elijah Holloway, who was ailing." "Old Elijah, God rest his soul," Cooper nodded. "Good man." "Yes, he was," Felicity agreed. "Very kind. I cared for him until his passing 3 weeks ago. The day before he died, he gave me his pocket watch as payment for my services. He said his son Thomas had never appreciated it anyway." Cooper and Reid exchanged glances. "Did anyone witness this gift?" Reid asked. Felicity shook her head. "No, it was just the 2 of us. Mr. Holloway was lucid, though. He knew exactly what he was doing. And I'm guessing Thomas found out about the watch after his father's funeral?" Cooper asked. "Yes," Felicity confirmed. "He came to the room I rent at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, demanding I return it. When I refused, explaining it was a gift, he became threatening. Said no one would believe a drifter woman over the son of Elijah Holloway." Reid's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And today, I went to Mr. Peterson's jewelry shop to have the watch valued. I need to leave town, you see. Find work elsewhere. I thought I might sell it to fund my journey." Felicity's voice wavered slightly. "Thomas must have heard somehow. He burst into the shop, accused me of stealing, and before I knew it, half the town was after me." Sheriff Cooper leaned back in his chair, stroking his mustache thoughtfully. "It's your word against his, Miss Morgan. And Thomas Holloway has a lot of influence in this town." "His father's influence," Reid corrected. "And from what I've heard, Thomas hasn't earned any of it himself." "True enough," Cooper conceded. "But it doesn't change our situation." Felicity's heart sank. She had hoped for justice, but it seemed even the law was hesitant to stand against the Holloway name. "May I see the watch?" Reid asked suddenly. Felicity hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew the timepiece. It was a beautiful thing, gold with intricate engravings and a small diamond set into the cover. She handed it to the marshal, who examined it carefully. "There's an inscription inside," she said quietly. Reid opened the watch and read aloud. "To Elijah, may time be kind, Margaret, 1850. He looked up. Margaret was Elijah's wife. Sheriff Cooper nodded. Thomas's mother. She passed nearly 20 years ago. So this was a gift from wife to husband, Reid mused, turning the watch over in his hand. Not a family heirloom passed from father to son. That's what Mr. Holloway told me, Felicity said. He said Thomas never showed any interest in it until recently, when he realized its value. Reid handed the watch back to Felicity. Keep it safe. I think I might have an idea. Before he could elaborate, the door to the sheriff's office burst open, and Thomas Holloway stormed in, followed by two men Felicity recognized as his business associates. Thomas was a man in his 40s, with his father's height, but none of his dignity. His face was flushed with drink and anger. There she is, he exclaimed, pointing at Felicity. And she still has my father's watch. Arrest her, Sheriff. Cooper rose from his desk. Now hold on, Thomas. We're getting to the bottom of this. What's to get to the bottom of? She stole from my father on his deathbed. Thomas's gaze swung to Reid. And who's this? Your deputy. U.S. Marshal Hunter Reid. Cooper introduced him. And I'd advise you to lower your voice and speak civilly in my office. Thomas scoffed, but moderated his tone slightly. Fine, but I want that thief locked up and my property returned. Reid stepped forward. Mr. Holloway, Miss Morgan claims the watch was a gift from your father. Given that it was originally a gift from your mother to him, it seems plausible he might choose to bestow it as he wished. Nonsense, Thomas spat. My father would never give a family treasure to some nurse he barely knew. 6 months of daily care builds quite a bond, Reid observed mildly. And from what I understand, you visited your father rather infrequently during his illness. Thomas's face darkened. You're new here, Marshal. You don't know anything about my family or our ways. Perhaps not, Reid conceded. But I do know the law. And right now, we have 2 conflicting claims on this property with no witnesses either way. Sheriff Cooper cleared his throat. Thomas, did your father ever specifically tell you the watch would be yours? Thomas hesitated, just a fraction too long. It was understood. He didn't need to say it. Reid and Cooper exchanged another glance, and Felicity realized they had caught the lie as clearly as she had. Well, until we can determine rightful ownership, I suggest the watch remain in the sheriff's custody, Reid said. Absolutely not. Thomas protested. That's my property. Mr. Holloway, Reid's voice hardened. You've already incited a mob today. I'd hate to add charges of disturbing the peace and obstruction of justice. Thomas glared at the marshal, then at Felicity, his eyes burning with hatred. This isn't over, he said, the same words he'd uttered in the alley. Not by a long shot. He turned on his heel and stormed out, his associates trailing behind him. When the door slammed shut, Felicity released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He'll be back, Sheriff Cooper said grimly. With more men, maybe a lawyer from Cheyenne. I know, Reid agreed. Which is why we need to act quickly. He turned to Felicity. Miss Morgan, would you be willing to swear before a judge that Elijah Holloway gifted you that watch? Felicity nodded. Yes, of course. It's the truth. Good. Reid looked back at Cooper. Is Judge Wilson still in town? Left yesterday for the circuit. Won't be back for a week at least. Reid frowned. That complicates things. He was silent for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Sheriff, I think it would be best if Miss Morgan stayed somewhere safe until the judge returns. Thomas Holloway doesn't strike me as the type to let this go. She can't stay here, Cooper said, gesturing to the cells. I won't lock up an innocent woman, and it wouldn't be proper otherwise. I have a room at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, Felicity offered, though the thought of returning there filled her with dread. Thomas knew exactly where to find her. Too obvious, Reid said, shaking his head. And Mrs. Wilson is Thomas's second cousin, if I recall correctly. You recall correctly, Cooper confirmed. Not that Martha would hurt a fly, but word gets around in a place like this. Reid sighed, then straightened his shoulders. I have a small cabin about 3 miles outside town. It's not much, but it's private and defensible. Miss Morgan would be safe there until the judge returns. Felicity's eyes widened at the suggestion. Stay alone with a man she had just met, Marshal or not. It was scandalous, potentially ruinous to her already fragile reputation. Sheriff Cooper seemed to read her thoughts. It's not ideal, miss, I know. But Reid here is one of the most honorable men I know. And right now, Your safety is the priority. Felicity looked between the two men, weighing her options. She had no family in Silver Creek, no close friends who could offer protection. The boarding house was no longer safe, and the thought of spending a week in a jail cell was unbearable. "Very well," she said finally. "I accept your offer, Marshal Reid." "Thank you." Reid nodded, his expression unreadable. "We should leave soon, before Holloway has time to rally more support. Do you need to collect anything from your room?" Felicity thought of her few possessions. A change of clothes, a photograph of her parents, a few books. "Yes, if possible." "I'll go with you," Reid said. "Sheriff, can you prepare some supplies? We might need to stay at the cabin longer than expected." Cooper nodded. "I'll have everything ready within the hour." "And Reid?" He fixed the marshal with a stern look. "Be careful. Thomas Holloway may be a blowhard, but he's dangerous when cornered." "I'm counting on it," Reid replied grimly. The walk to Mrs. Wilson's boarding house was tense. Reid kept Felicity close to his side, his eyes constantly scanning the street for potential threats. The town seemed unnaturally quiet, with people hurrying indoors as they passed, avoiding eye contact. "They're afraid," Felicity observed softly. "People usually are when they've done something they're ashamed of," Reid replied. "Mob mentality is a powerful thing. Each person feels less responsible when they're part of a crowd." "You sound like you've seen your share of mobs." A shadow passed over his face. "More than I care to remember." Mrs. Wilson met them at the door, her plump face creased with worry. "Miss Morgan, thank heavens you're all right. I heard the commotion in town." Her eyes darted nervously to Reid. "Marshal." "Mrs. Wilson," he acknowledged with a slight tip of his hat. "Miss Morgan needs to collect her belongings. We won't be long." The landlady wrung her hands. "Thomas was here not 10 minutes ago, looking for her. He was quite upset." "Did he threaten you?" Reid asked sharply. "Not in so many words, but—" She trailed off, her meaning clear. "We'll be quick," Felicity promised, already moving toward the stairs. Her room was small but neat, just as she had left it that morning. It took only minutes to pack her meager possessions into her carpet bag. The photograph of her parents went in last, carefully wrapped in a handkerchief. "Is that everything?" Reid asked from the doorway, where he had stood watch. Felicity nodded, taking one last look around the room that had been her home for the past 6 months. "Yes, I'm ready." They left through the back door, avoiding the main street. Reid led her to a stable where his horse waited, along with a second mount, a gentle-looking bay mare. "Sheriff Cooper sent word ahead," Reid explained, securing Felicity's bag to the mare's saddle. "Thought you might be more comfortable riding your own horse." The consideration touched her. "Thank you." He helped her mount, then checked the cinches on both horses before swinging up onto his own gelding. "Stay close," he instructed as they set out. "The cabin isn't far, but we'll take a roundabout route just to be safe." True to his word, Reid led them on a winding path out of town, avoiding the main roads in favor of less-traveled trails. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills covered in sagebrush, the distant mountains rising blue against the sky. Under different circumstances, Felicity might have found it beautiful. They rode in silence for some time, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Reid spoke. "You mentioned needing to leave town. Where were you planning to go?" Felicity hesitated, then decided there was no harm in answering. "Denver, perhaps. Or San Francisco. Somewhere I could find work as a nurse in a proper hospital." "That's quite a journey for a woman alone." There was no judgment in his tone, merely observation, but Felicity felt a flicker of defensiveness. "I've managed on my own since I was 18, Marshal. When my parents died of influenza, I had to make my own way." Reid nodded. "I didn't mean to imply you weren't capable, just that the frontier can be harsh, especially for someone traveling solo." "Yes, well, I've learned that people can be harsh too, wherever you go." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. "True enough," Reid agreed. "Though sometimes you find kindness where you least expect it." Before she could respond, he reined in his horse, signaling for her to do the same. They had crested a small rise, and below them, nestled among a stand of pines, sat a modest cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a small corral stood empty beside a lean-to stable. "Someone's there," Felicity said, alarmed. Reid shook his head. "Sheriff Cooper must have sent someone ahead to light a fire. It's all right." He led the way down the slope, approaching the cabin from the side rather than the main trail. As they drew closer, Felicity could see that it was indeed a small place, but well built and maintained. A covered porch wrapped around two sides, and a stack of firewood was neatly piled against one wall. "It's not much," Reid said as he dismounted, "but it's solid and warm." "It's lovely," Felicity replied honestly, accepting his help down from her horse. The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable. One large room served as kitchen, dining, and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A door at the back presumably led to a bedroom. Everything was neat and orderly, with none of the clutter one might expect in a bachelor's dwelling. "You keep a tidy home, Marshal," Felicity observed, setting her bag down on a sturdy wooden table. "I'm not here often enough to make much of a mess," he replied, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "And please, call me Hunter. Marshal seems overly formal given the circumstances." Felicity nodded, though using his given name felt strangely intimate. "Very well. Hunter." He busied himself checking the supplies that had been left: coffee, flour, beans, salt pork, and other staples. "Looks like Cooper sent enough to last us a week at least." "I can cook," Felicity offered. "It's the least I can do." Hunter looked up, a genuine smile softening his features for the first time since they'd met. "I won't turn down a home-cooked meal. My culinary skills are limited to not burning coffee and occasionally producing edible flapjacks." The small joke eased some of the tension between them. Felicity found herself smiling back. "Then we won't starve, at least." "The bedroom is through there," Hunter said, nodding toward the door at the back. "You'll take it, of course. I'll sleep out here by the fire." "I couldn't possibly displace you from your own bed," he waved away her protest. "I insist. Besides, I've slept in far worse places than my own floor." He picked up her bag. "Why don't you get settled while I see to the horses?" When he had gone, Felicity explored the bedroom. Like the rest of the cabin, it was simply furnished but comfortable. A brass bed with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin. A window looked out toward the mountains, the glass remarkably clean. She unpacked her few belongings, arranging them neatly on the dresser. The photograph of her parents she placed where she could see it from the bed, her father standing tall and proud in his Sunday best, her mother seated before him, her gentle smile preserved for eternity. "What would you think of all this?" she murmured to their image. Her proper, respectable parents would surely be horrified to find their daughter staying unchaperoned with a man, Marshal or not. But they had also raised her to be practical and resilient. They would understand that sometimes survival trumped propriety. When Hunter returned, Felicity had already begun preparing a simple supper from the supplies. The familiar tasks of cooking grounded her, providing a welcome distraction from the day's events. "Something smells good," Hunter observed, washing his hands in a basin by the door. "Just beans and bacon," Felicity replied. "And biscuits, if the oven in this stove behaves. Better than anything I'd have managed." He moved to help her set the table, their movements forming an unexpectedly comfortable rhythm as they worked around each other in the small space. As they ate, Hunter told her about his work as a marshal, tracking outlaws across the territories, bringing law to places too remote or too wild for local sheriffs to handle alone. "It must be lonely," Felicity observed, watching him across the table. He shrugged. "I'm used to it. And there's a certain freedom in the solitude." "Is that why you became a marshal? For the freedom?" Hunter was quiet for a moment, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "No," he finally said. "I became a marshal because I saw too many people suffering at the hands of those who thought themselves above the law." There was something in his voice, a controlled intensity that hinted at deeper waters. "You lost someone," Felicity guessed softly. His eyes met hers, surprised by her perception. "My sister. 7 years ago. She and her husband were homesteading in Nebraska when their place was attacked by a gang looking for easy pickings. By the time I got there." He trailed off, the memory clearly still painful. "I'm sorry," Felicity said, resisting the urge to reach across the table and take his hand. Hunter nodded his acknowledgement of her sympathy. "The local sheriff was too afraid to go after them. Said they were too dangerous, too well-connected. So I tracked them myself. Took nearly a year, but I found every last one." He didn't elaborate on what happened when he found them, but Felicity could guess. And afterward, you became a marshal. Seemed like the right path, he said simply. What about you? How does a young woman end up traveling alone across the frontier? Felicity told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a doctor and his wife. How she had learned nursing at her father's side, assisting in his practice from the time she could read his instructions. How the influenza epidemic of '75 had taken both her parents within days of each other, leaving her alone at 18 with a house full of memories and crushing debts. I sold everything to pay what was owed, then used what little remained to travel west, she explained. I've been working my way across the country ever since, staying in each place long enough to earn money for the next journey. Why not stay in one place? Hunter asked. A skilled nurse could build a good life in any decent-sized town. Felicity stared into her coffee cup, unsure how to answer. The truth was complicated, tied up in grief and restlessness and a search for something she couldn't name. I haven't found anywhere that feels like home, she said finally. Not since Boston. Hunter nodded as if he understood perfectly. Perhaps he did. They fell into a companionable silence as they finished their meal. Outside, the light was fading, painting the room in warm golden hues. Felicity realized with a start that despite the danger and uncertainty of her situation, she felt more at ease in this moment than she had in months. The peace was shattered by the distant sound of hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching fast. Hunter was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to his holster. Stay inside, he ordered, his voice transformed from conversational to commanding in a heartbeat. Away from the windows. Heart racing. Felicity moved to the corner of the room as Hunter blew out the lamp, plunging the cabin into relative darkness. Only the fire in the hearth provided light now, casting long shadows across the walls. Hunter positioned himself by the window, peering cautiously through a gap in the curtains. For riders, he reported quietly. Coming up the main trail. Could be nothing, but it could be Thomas. Felicity finished for him. Hunter nodded grimly. He must have followed our trail somehow, or guessed where we'd go. He moved to the fireplace and removed a rifle from a rack above the mantel, checking it quickly before loading it. Take this, he said, handing her his spare revolver. Only if absolutely necessary. The weight of the gun was unfamiliar and frightening in Felicity's hand. I've never fired one before. Point and squeeze the trigger, Hunter said tersely. But hopefully it won't come to that. The riders were close now, their approach no longer hidden. They clattered into the clearing before the cabin, voices raised in drunken confidence. Marshal Reid. Thomas Holloway's voice rang out. We know you're in there, and we know you've got the thief with you. Hunter muttered a curse under his breath. Stay here, he instructed Felicity. No matter what happens, don't come outside unless I tell you it's safe. Before she could protest, he was moving to the door, adjusting his hat and checking his holster. With one last glance at her, he stepped out onto the porch, partially closing the door behind him but leaving it just ajar enough that she could hear. Mr. Holloway. Hunter's voice carried clearly in the evening air. This is quite a ride from town just to pay a social call. Cut the act, Marshal. Thomas slurred, clearly intoxicated. We know you're harboring that thief. Hand her over, and maybe we'll let you walk away from this. Felicity crept closer to the door, peering through the narrow opening. Thomas sat astride a large black horse, flanked by 3 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. All 4 were armed, and all appeared to have been drinking heavily. Miss Morgan is under my protection while we await the judge's ruling on this matter, Hunter replied evenly. I suggest you gentlemen return to town before you do something you'll regret. One of Thomas's companions laughed, an ugly sound. 4 against 1, Marshal. Those ain't good odds, even for a lawman. I've faced worse, Hunter said, his hand resting casually near his holster. But I'm giving you the chance to ride away now, no harm done. Thomas spat on the ground. We're not leaving without that woman and my property. The watch is in Sheriff Cooper's custody, Hunter informed him. And Miss Morgan stays with me. Those are the facts of the matter, Mr. Holloway. Then I guess we're doing this the hard way. Thomas growled, his hand moving toward his gun. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Felicity could barely follow it. In one fluid motion, Hunter drew his revolver and fired a shot that struck the ground directly in front of Thomas's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider. Before any of the men could recover, Hunter had taken cover behind one of the porch posts, his gun trained steadily on them. "That was a warning," he called out. "The next one won't be. Now turn around and ride out of here before I arrest the lot of you for threatening a federal officer." For a tense moment, it seemed the confrontation might escalate further. Thomas's face was contorted with rage, and two of his companions had drawn their weapons. But the third man, apparently possessing more sense than the others, grabbed Thomas's arm. "Let's go, Thomas," he urged. "This ain't worth dying over." Thomas shook him off angrily, but seemed to reconsider his options. "This isn't over, Marshal," he snarled. "Not by a long shot." "It's over for tonight," Hunter replied steadily. "Ride out. Now." With a final venomous glare, Thomas wheeled his horse around. His companions followed suit, and soon the sound of their departure faded into the gathering darkness. Hunter remained on the porch until they were well away, then came back inside, his expression grim. "They'll be back," he said, closing and barring the door. "Probably not tonight, they're too drunk to organize properly. But tomorrow, when they're sober and have had time to plan." Felicity felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "What do we do?" Hunter moved to the window, checking that the curtains were securely drawn. "We prepare. And first thing in the morning, I'm going to ride out and see if I can find Judge Wilson on his circuit. We need to resolve this officially before someone gets killed." "You're leaving?" Felicity couldn't keep the alarm from her voice. "Only for a day, maybe two," Hunter assured her. "You'll be safer here than in town. They won't expect you to stay alone, so they'll likely follow me, thinking I'm taking you somewhere else." It was a logical plan, but the thought of being left alone with Thomas and his men still on the loose terrified her. "And if they come back while you're gone?" Hunter crossed to her, taking the revolver from her hand. She had forgotten she was still holding it. "You remember what I said? Point and squeeze. But you won't need to." He led her to a trapdoor concealed under a rug. "Root cellar. If anyone comes, you hide down there. It's well hidden and stocked with enough supplies for several days." Felicity nodded, though her heart was racing. "All right." Hunter studied her face. "You're very brave, Miss Morgan." "Felicity," she corrected him softly. "If I'm to call you Hunter, then you must call me Felicity." A small smile touched his lips. "Felicity, then." He returned to securing the cabin, checking locks, and placing weapons within easy reach. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow will come early." But sleep proved elusive for Felicity that night. She lay in Hunter's bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the creaking of the cabin as it settled. Through the thin wall, she could hear Hunter moving about occasionally, keeping watch. She thought of the way he had stood between her and the mob, unflinching and resolute. The way he had faced down 4 armed men without showing a hint of fear. There was something both frightening and comforting in such capability, such willingness to put himself at risk for a woman he barely knew. It was past midnight when Felicity finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, the weight of the day's events pulling her under despite her racing thoughts. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet movement in the main room. Dawn was just breaking, painting the eastern sky visible through her window with delicate pinks and golds. For a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings, she couldn't remember where she was or how she had gotten there. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly. Dressing hastily, Felicity emerged from the bedroom to find Hunter already prepared for travel. He wore a fresh shirt and had trimmed his beard, though his eyes betrayed his lack of sleep. "Good morning," he greeted her, pouring a cup of coffee and offering it to her. "I was about to wake you." "You're leaving now?" Felicity asked, accepting the cup gratefully. Hunter nodded. "The sooner I find Judge Wilson, the sooner we can resolve this. I've left you plenty of supplies, and there's a shotgun by the door if you need it." He hesitated, then added, "I don't expect trouble, but just in case, remember what I showed you last night. The root cellar is your safest option." "I remember," Felicity assured him, though the thought of being left alone still filled her with dread. They shared a quick breakfast, neither speaking much. When it was time for Hunter to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Stay safe, Felicity," he said simply. "You too, Hunter." And then he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading as he rode away. Felicity stood in the doorway until he disappeared from sight, then closed and barred the door as he had instructed. The cabin felt suddenly larger and emptier without Hunter's presence. Felicity busied herself with mundane tasks, washing the breakfast dishes, sweeping the floor, organizing the supplies. Anything to keep her mind from dwelling on her predicament. As the day wore on, her initial fear gradually subsided. The cabin was secure, and Hunter had hidden her well. She even ventured onto the porch briefly in the afternoon, savoring the fresh air and the view of the mountains. It was late afternoon when Felicity heard the distant sound of approaching riders. Her heart leaped into her throat as she rushed inside, securing the door and moving to the window to peer cautiously through the curtains. 3 riders were approaching, but they weren't Thomas and his men. These were different rough-looking strangers whose manner suggested they weren't merely passing through. They rode directly to the cabin, their eyes scanning the property with predatory intent. Felicity's mouth went dry. Whoever these men were, their presence boded ill. She glanced at the shotgun by the door, then at the trapdoor to the root cellar. Hunter's instructions echoed in her mind. If anyone comes, you hide down there. Making her decision, Felicity quickly gathered a few essentials: a candle, matches, a knife, and lifted the trapdoor. The cellar below was cool and dark, shelves stocked with preserves and supplies, just as Hunter had said. She descended quickly, pulling the trapdoor closed above her just as she heard boots on the porch. The cellar was larger than she had expected, extending beyond the footprint of the cabin itself. Felicity found a corner where she could sit with her back against the wall, the knife clutched in her trembling hand. Above her, she could hear muffled voices as the men entered the cabin. "Place looks lived in," one voice said. "But nobody's home. Check the bedroom," another ordered. Marshal might have left something worth taking. They were looking for Hunter, Felicity realized with a chill. These weren't Thomas's men, they were something worse. Outlaws, perhaps, with a grudge against the lawmen who had tracked their kind across the territories. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the men ransacked the cabin overhead. Felicity remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Eventually, the voices moved outside, and she heard them checking the stable and surrounding area. "Nobody here," one of them concluded. "But Reid's been here recently. Trail's still fresh. Think he went to town? Only one way to find out. Mount up." Felicity waited until the sound of hoofbeats had completely faded before she dared to emerge from the cellar. The cabin was a mess, drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, Hunter's few possessions scattered across the floor. The sight filled her with both relief and guilt. Relief that she had not been discovered, guilt that Hunter's home had been violated because of her presence. She set about restoring order, her mind racing. Who were those men? What did they want with Hunter? And would they return? The questions had no answers, only more worrying possibilities. As darkness fell, Felicity secured the cabin as best she could and kept the shotgun close at hand. Sleep was out of the question. She would maintain her vigil until Hunter returned or dawn broke, whichever came first. The night passed slowly, each sound from the forest outside sending a fresh jolt of adrenaline through her system. By morning, Felicity was exhausted but still alert, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. It was mid-morning when she heard a single horse approaching. Gripping the shotgun, she moved to the window, praying it was Hunter returning earlier than expected. Her heart sank when she saw the rider, a stranger, though not one of the men from the previous day. This man was older, better dressed, with the look of someone accustomed to authority. He reined in before the cabin and called out, "Hello, the house. Is Marshal Reid here?" Felicity hesitated, unsure whether to answer or remain hidden. The man didn't appear threatening, but after the events of the past 2 days, she was taking no chances. "I'm Sheriff Cooper's deputy," the man continued when no answer came. "Name's Frank Murray. The sheriff sent me to check on things." This gave Felicity pause. Hunter had mentioned Cooper might send someone to check on them. Still cautious, she called through the door, "How do I know you're really the deputy?" The man sighed, then reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew a badge similar to Sheriff Cooper's. "Will this suffice, miss? Or would you prefer I recite the entire Silver Creek Town Charter?" There was something reassuringly genuine about his exasperation. Felicity unbarred the door and opened it slightly, the shotgun still ready in her hands. The man on the porch matched his voice, grizzled, weather-beaten, with kind eyes that widened at the sight of her armed stance. "Miss Morgan, I presume," he said, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. Sheriff Cooper was concerned when Marshal Reid rode into town yesterday looking for Judge Wilson, then left again in a hurry. "Asked me to ride out and make sure you were all right." "Marshal Reid was in town yesterday?" Felicity asked, lowering the shotgun slightly. Deputy Murray nodded. Briefly. Seemed in a powerful hurry to find the judge. Sheriff told him Judge Wilson had changed his route, was heading to Fort Laramie instead of the usual circuit. Reid rode out immediately after. This aligned with what Hunter had told her about finding the judge, which lent credibility to Murray's story. Still, after the previous day's visitors, Felicity remained cautious. "3 men came here yesterday," she informed him. "They were looking for Marshal Reid. They searched the cabin." Murray's expression darkened. "Did you recognize any of them?" Felicity shook her head. "They weren't from Silver Creek, at least not that I've seen." "Rough types. The Bradford gang, most likely," Murray said grimly. 3 brothers who've been causing trouble across 2 territories. Reid arrested their youngest brother last month. They've been looking for payback ever since. "They didn't find me," Felicity said. "I hid in the root cellar, as Marshal Reid instructed." Murray nodded approvingly. "Smart. Those Bradford boys aren't known for their gentlemanly behavior toward women." He glanced around the clearing. "I'd feel better if you came back to town with me, miss. Reid's cabin isn't safe if they know he uses it." Felicity's grip tightened on the shotgun. "Marshal Reid told me to stay here. And I'm not exactly welcome in Silver Creek at the moment, Deputy." "That situation's changed somewhat," Murray informed her. "Thomas Holloway made quite a fool of himself yesterday, getting drunk and boasting about running you and Reid off. When folks heard he'd led armed men out here, threatening a federal marshal, public opinion shifted. Thomas has never been as well liked as his father." This was unexpected news, but Felicity wasn't entirely convinced. "Even so, I gave my word I'd stay here." Murray sighed. "At least let me stay until Reid returns. Those Bradford boys could come back any time, and next time they might search more thoroughly." His concern seemed genuine, and Felicity had to admit the idea of having an ally present was appealing after her night of solitary vigilance. "Very well," she conceded, finally lowering the shotgun completely. "You can stay, Deputy Murray." He dismounted and tethered his horse, then followed her into the cabin. If he noticed the lingering disarray from the previous day's invasion, he didn't comment on it. "Have you eaten, miss?" he asked, removing his hat and hanging it beside the door. "Not since yesterday," Felicity admitted, suddenly aware of her hunger now that the immediate tension had passed. "Then allow me to prepare something," Murray offered. "I may not look it, but I'm quite handy in a kitchen. 15 years as a widower teaches a man to fend for himself." Grateful for both the offer and the normalizing presence of another person, Felicity agreed. As Murray busied himself with the stove, she took the opportunity to wash her face and tidy her appearance, which had suffered during her night of watchfulness. The meal Murray prepared was simple but satisfying: bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee. As they ate, he filled her in on the latest developments in Silver Creek. "Sheriff Cooper's been making inquiries about Thomas Holloway," he explained. "Turns out the man's been mismanaging his father's estate, something terrible. Banks threatening foreclosure on several properties. Might explain why he's so desperate to get his hands on that watch." "He needs the money," Felicity surmised. Murray nodded. "That, and it's a matter of pride now. He made such a public accusation against you that backing down would mean losing face. Men like Thomas Holloway care about that sort of thing more than most." "And the Bradford gang?" Felicity asked. "Are they connected to Thomas somehow?" "Not likely," Murray said, shaking his head. "That's just bad timing. They've been trailing Reid for weeks, from what we hear. Probably spotted him riding into this area and decided to make their move." The remainder of the day passed uneventfully. Murray proved to be good company, full of stories about the early days of Silver Creek and his adventures as a lawman. Felicity found herself relaxing in his presence, the constant fear of the past 2 days finally beginning to recede. As evening approached, Murray insisted on taking the first watch. "You look exhausted, miss. Get some rest. I'll wake you in a few hours to take your turn." Felicity was too tired to argue. She retired to the bedroom, leaving the door ajar so she could hear if anything happened. Despite her intention to remain alert, she fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. She woke disoriented, the room dark around her. Something had disturbed her slumberous sound, perhaps, or just her own restless mind. Felicity sat up, listening intently. The cabin was silent. Too silent. Deputy Murray should have been moving about, tending the fire, keeping watch. But there was nothing, no creak of floorboards, no rustle of movement. A sense of foreboding settled over Felicity as she rose quietly from the bed. The main room was dimly lit by the dying embers in the fireplace, casting long shadows across the floor. Murray was nowhere to be seen. "Deputy," she called softly, moving toward the door. No answer came. The front door stood slightly ajar, a cool night breeze slipping through the gap. Felicity approached cautiously, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. Something was very wrong. She pushed the door open wider, peering out onto the moonlit porch. And there, slumped against the railing, was Deputy Murray. A dark stain spread across his chest, his eyes staring sightlessly at the night sky. Felicity clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. Murray had been shot, and recently the blood still glistened wetly in the moonlight. "Checking on your friend, Miss Morgan," a voice drawled from the darkness. "Afraid he ain't much for conversation anymore." Three figures emerged from the shadows, the Bradford gang. The leader, a tall man with a scarred face, held a revolver casually at his side, still smoking slightly from recent use. "Reid ain't here to protect you now," he continued, advancing toward the porch. "But don't worry. We're gonna wait right here with you until he gets back. Gonna give him a proper welcome." Felicity's mind raced. The shotgun was inside, leaning against the wall near the door. If she could reach it. "Now, don't go getting any ideas," the second man warned, as if reading her thoughts. "Just come on out here nice and quiet like. Or we come in after you," the third added with a chilling grin. "Your choice, pretty lady." Felicity backed into the cabin, her eyes never leaving the three advancing men. "What do you want with Marshal Reid?" she asked, trying to keep them talking as she edged toward the shotgun. "He put our brother in prison," the leader spat. 5 years hard labor for what they're calling armed robbery. Billy was just trying to feed his family. By robbing a stagecoach and shooting the driver? Felicity guessed, her back now to the wall where the shotgun stood. The leader's eyes narrowed. "You got a smart mouth on you, woman. Might have to teach you some manners before Reid shows up." In one swift movement, Felicity grabbed the shotgun and swung it up, pointing it at the doorway. "Stay back," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The men hesitated, clearly not expecting armed resistance from a woman. The leader raised his hands slightly, though his gun remained in his grip. Now, he said, his tone falsely placating. "No need for that. We ain't here for you. Just put that down before you hurt yourself." "I know how to use this," Felicity lied, praying they couldn't see her trembling hands. "And I will if you take one more step toward this cabin." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, the leader nodded almost imperceptibly to his companions, a signal of some kind. Felicity tensed, her finger hovering near the trigger. "Last chance," the leader said, his false politeness evaporating. "Put down the gun, or we burn this place to the ground with you in it." Felicity's resolve wavered. She could shoot one of them, maybe two if she was lucky, but not all three, and if they set fire to the cabin. The standoff was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, fast and purposeful. All heads turned toward the sound, and Felicity's heart leaped with both hope and fear. Was it Hunter returning, or more of Thomas Holloway's men? "Looks like the marshal's back sooner than expected," the leader of the Bradford gang said with a cruel smile. "Boys, take positions. Let's give him a proper greeting." The three men scattered, taking cover behind trees and the stable. Felicity remained frozen in the doorway, the shotgun still clutched in her hands. She had to warn Hunter somehow, but any movement outside would make her an easy target. The rider came into view, and Felicity's breath caught in her throat. It was indeed Hunter, riding hard toward the cabin. He was alone and clearly unaware of the danger awaiting him. In that moment, Felicity made her decision. Stepping fully onto the porch, she raised the shotgun and fired into the air. The recoil nearly knocked her off her feet, but the warning shot had its intended effect. Hunter immediately reined in his horse, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. "Hunter, it's a trap," Felicity shouted. The Bradford gang. Her warning was punctuated by gunfire as the hidden men opened fire on Hunter. He threw himself from his horse, rolling behind a large boulder for cover. "Felicity, get back inside," he called out, returning fire toward the muzzle flashes in the darkness. But before she could retreat, a rough hand seized her from behind. The leader of the Bradford gang had circled around during the confusion and now held her tightly, his gun pressed to her temple. "Drop your weapon, Reid," he shouted, "or the woman dies." The night fell suddenly, terribly silent. Felicity could feel the man's breath hot against her cheek, his arm like an iron band around her waist. "Let her go, Bradford." Hunter's voice came from the darkness. "This is between you and me. She has nothing to do with it." "She does now," Bradford replied. "Show yourself, unarmed, or I paint this porch with her brains." Felicity's mind whirled, fear threatening to overwhelm her. Then, through her panic, she remembered the knife she had kept in her pocket since the previous day's scare. Slowly, imperceptibly, she slipped her free hand into her pocket, fingers closing around the handle. "You've got 10 seconds, Reid," Bradford called out. 10, 9. "I'm coming out," Hunter replied, his voice closer now. "Don't hurt her." "No," Felicity cried. "Hunter, don't." 8, 7. Hunter stepped into the clearing, his empty hands raised. The moonlight illuminated his face, grim and resolute. "Let her go, Bradford. Then you can do whatever you want with me." Bradford laughed, a harsh sound next to Felicity's ear. "That's mighty gallant of you, Marshal. But I think I'll keep the lady as insurance for now." He gestured with his gun. "Boys, get his weapons." The other two Bradford brothers emerged from their hiding places, approaching Hunter cautiously, guns trained on him. As they neared, Felicity knew it was now or never. With all their attention on Hunter, she gripped the knife tightly and, in one desperate motion, drove it backward into Bradford's thigh. He howled in pain and surprise, his grip on her loosening just enough. Felicity twisted away, dropping to the porch floor as Hunter seized the momentary distraction. In a blur of movement, he lunged forward, tackling the nearest Bradford brother to the ground. Gunfire erupted once more, chaotic and deafening in the night. Felicity crawled toward the cabin door, desperate to get out of the line of fire. Behind her, she heard grunts and the sounds of a physical struggle as Hunter fought with the outlaws. A shadow fell across her, and Felicity looked up to see the third Bradford brother standing over her, his gun aimed at her heart. His finger tightened on the trigger, and then his eyes widened in shock as a bullet struck him from behind. He crumpled to the porch beside her, revealing Hunter standing several yards away, his gun still raised. "Stay down," he shouted to her, turning to face the remaining threat. Bradford himself had recovered somewhat from the knife wound, limping toward them with murder in his eyes. "You're dead, Reid," he snarled, raising his gun. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Bradford staggered, then fell face first into the dirt. Hunter remained standing, though Felicity saw him wince and press a hand to his side. "Hunter," she cried, scrambling to her feet and rushing to his side. "You're hurt." "Just a graze," he assured her, though his face was pale in the moonlight. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" Felicity shook her head, tears of relief and delayed shock filling her eyes. "I'm fine. But Deputy Murray, they killed him." Hunter's expression hardened as he looked toward the slumped figure on the porch. "Murray? Cooper sent him to check on me," Felicity explained, helping Hunter to a nearby stump where he could sit. "He was kind. He made me dinner." Her voice broke, the events of the night finally overwhelming her. Hunter reached out, drawing her against his chest with his free arm. "It's over now," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe." For several minutes, they remained thus, finding comfort in each other's presence amid the aftermath of violence. Finally, Hunter gently pulled away, wincing slightly at the movement. "We need to tend to that," Felicity said, gesturing to the bloodstains spreading on his shirt. Inside, Hunter agreed. "Then I need to secure the scene. Law will have questions." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Felicity cleaned and bandaged Hunter's wound, indeed just a graze, but deep enough to be concerning. Hunter, despite her protests, insisted on dragging the bodies of the Bradford brothers to the stable, covering them with a tarp until proper authorities could be notified. Murray's body they laid out more respectfully on a table Hunter constructed quickly from planks, covered with a clean sheet. By dawn, exhaustion had overtaken them both. They sat side by side on the porch steps, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky with delicate colors that seemed obscenely beautiful after the night's horrors. "I found Judge Wilson," Hunter said finally, breaking the long silence. "He's riding to Silver Creek today. Should arrive by noon." Felicity nodded, too drained to feel much relief at the news. "What will happen then?" "He'll hear the evidence about the watch. Make a ruling." Hunter glanced at her. "And then I suppose you'll continue on your journey. To Denver or San Francisco?" There was something in his voice, a question unasked, a door left slightly ajar. Felicity looked at him, really looked at this man who had repeatedly risked his life for her, who had stood between her and danger without hesitation. "What if I didn't?" she asked softly. Hunter's eyes met hers, searching. "Didn't what?" "Continue on. Leave." Felicity's heart raced, but not from fear this time. "What if I found somewhere that felt like home?" Understanding dawned in Hunter's expression, followed by something warmer, more vulnerable than she had yet seen in him. "Silver Creek could use a skilled nurse," he said carefully. "And I have this cabin that's too big for one person." Felicity smiled, her first genuine smile in what felt like ages. "It's a good cabin. Needs a woman's touch, though." Hunter's hand found hers, his calloused fingers intertwining with her smaller ones. "Is that an offer, Miss Morgan?" "It might be, Marshal Reid," she replied, leaning slightly against his shoulder. "It just might be." The journey back to Silver Creek later that morning was tense, but uneventful. Sheriff Cooper met them at the edge of town, his face grave as Hunter explained the events at the cabin. Deputies were dispatched immediately to recover the bodies and investigate the scene. Judge Wilson proved to be a fair-minded man who listened carefully to both Felicity's account and Thomas Holloway's increasingly desperate claims. When the inscription inside the watch was revealed, and several townspeople stepped forward to testify about Elijah Holloway's estrangement from his son in his final years, the judge's decision was clear. This timepiece was a gift from wife to husband, he declared in the packed town hall. Not a family heirloom passing through male lineage, as Mr. Holloway claims. Furthermore, multiple witnesses have testified to Elijah Holloway's sound mind in his final days. If he chose to gift this watch to Miss Morgan as payment for her dedicated care, that was his right, as its owner. He fixed Thomas with a stern gaze. "The watch belongs to Miss Morgan, legally and morally. And Mr. Holloway, you will face charges for inciting violence and threatening a federal officer. This court is adjourned." Thomas Holloway's face contorted with rage, but surrounded by lawmen and faced with the town's shifted opinion, he could do nothing but storm from the hall, his remaining supporters slinking away behind him. Felicity stood clutching the watch, still hardly believing the ordeal was over. Hunter appeared at her side, his presence steady and reassuring as always. "It's done," he said simply. "Yes," she agreed, looking up at him. "Now what?" Hunter smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his serious face. "Now, Miss Morgan, I believe you mentioned something about adding a woman's touch to my cabin." "I believe I did, Marshal Reid," she replied, returning his smile. "Though there's the matter of propriety to consider." "Indeed there is," Hunter agreed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. "Which is why I took the liberty of speaking with Reverend Jameson this morning. He's available to perform a ceremony as early as next Sunday, if the lady is willing." Felicity's heart skipped a beat. "That's rather sudden, isn't it?" "Life out here can be short and unpredictable," Hunter said, his expression growing serious. "The last few days have made that abundantly clear. When you find something worth holding on to, you don't waste time with unnecessary hesitation." He took her hands in his. "I know we've known each other only briefly, Felicity, but I also know that I've never met anyone like you, brave, kind, and determined. I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife." Around them, the townspeople were filing out of the hall, many nodding respectfully to them as they passed. This was a far cry from the mob that had chased Felicity just days earlier, evidence of how quickly fortunes could change on the frontier. "You haven't actually asked me a question yet, Marshal," Felicity pointed out, though her heart was already answering. Hunter laughed softly. Then, to her surprise, lowered himself to one knee right there in the town hall. "Felicity Morgan, will you marry me?" The watch in her hand seemed to pulse with significance, a gift that had brought her both danger and, ultimately, the possibility of happiness. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will." The following Sunday, in the small white church on the hill overlooking Silver Creek, Felicity Morgan became Felicity Reid. The ceremony was simple but lovely, attended by Sheriff Cooper, Mrs. Wilson, who had apologized profusely for her cousin's behavior, and a surprising number of townspeople who seemed eager to make amends for their part in the mob. Thomas Holloway was notably absent, having been transported to Cheyenne to await trial for his various offenses. His father's estate, as Deputy Murray had predicted, was indeed on the verge of bankruptcy, with creditors descending like vultures now that the truth was known. After the ceremony, Hunter and Felicity rode out to their cabin now. The signs of violence had been erased as much as possible. Fresh paint covered the bloodstains on the porch, new curtains hung in the windows, and flowers from town adorned the table inside. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reid," Hunter said as he carried her across the threshold, mindful of his still healing wound. "It's perfect," Felicity replied, taking in the simple space that had witnessed both terrible violence and the beginning of their unlikely love. "Or it will be, once I've had my way with it." Hunter laughed, setting her down gently. "I don't doubt it, though I hope you'll keep some time free from decorating for other pursuits." "What did you have in mind, Marshal?" Felicity asked, her cheeks warming at his suggestive tone. He pulled her close, his arms encircling her waist. "Well, Mrs. Reid, I was thinking we might start with this." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that made Felicity's head spin. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hunter rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. "When I rode into Silver Creek that day, I was just passing through on my way to track another outlaw. And instead, you found a woman hiding from an angry mob," Felicity finished for him. "Best detour I ever took," Hunter said, kissing her again. Outside, the sun was setting over the Wyoming wilderness, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Inside, a new life was beginning, one neither of them had imagined possible just days before. 5 years later, the cabin had expanded considerably. A new wing housed Hunter's office, where he conducted his increasingly administrative duties as the region's chief marshal. Another addition contained Felicity's clinic, where she treated everything from minor injuries to childbirth complications with skill and compassion that had earned her the town's respect and gratitude. The porch where Deputy Murray had died now rang with the laughter of their 3-year-old daughter, Eleanor, named for Hunter's sister, and their 1-year-old son, James, named for Felicity's father. The root cellar that had once been a hiding place was now stocked with preserves Felicity made each harvest season. The shotgun that had saved their lives mounted ceremonially above the fireplace, unloaded and out of children's reach. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Hunter and Felicity sat on that same porch, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains. "Do you ever think about it?" Hunter asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "How differently things might have turned out if I hadn't ridden into town that day." Felicity leaned into his embrace, the gold pocket watch which she had kept and treasured warm in her pocket. "Sometimes, I might be in San Francisco by now, still searching for somewhere that felt like home. And I'd still be riding alone, hunting outlaws and never staying in one place long enough to put down roots," Hunter mused. "Instead, look at us," Felicity said, gesturing to their children, their home, the life they had built together. "All because an angry mob chased me down an alley." Hunter chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And a stubborn lawman decided to draw his gun and stand between them." "I'm glad he did," Felicity said softly. "So am I, my love," Hunter replied, drawing her closer as their children's laughter filled the evening air. "So am I." The pocket watch that had started it all remained with the Reid family for generations, passed down as a symbol of how fate could turn on the smallest of moments, a gift, a chase, a stand taken. And with it passed the story of a brave nurse and the marshal who had drawn his gun to protect her, finding in each other the home they had both been seeking all along.